Hi, I'm Jim Stow from ADSR Sounds, and we've got a great October planned. We were actually able to catch up to Mr. Alan Howarth. Alan's responsible for some of the most iconic sound effects, some of the most famous scores to some of our favorite movies. These movies include Poltergeist, Christine, Halloween, They Live, Big Trouble in Little China. The list goes on. And Alan actually spills the beans on how he created a lot of these famous sound effects. So please enjoy part 1 of a 4-part series of the Alan Howarth interview. Just looking at what you have behind you right now, so I'm looking at, I believe is that it's an ARP?
Avatar.
ARP Avatar. Okay, so then is that a Mini Moog Model D?
Yeah, it's a Model D. It's an original one.
And then is that a
Kurzweil 2661? Yeah, Kurzweil. So it's a baby version of a 2600.
And then to the left, it looks like you're running Logic.
Running Logic. This is whatever the key station, the M Audio key station, and then behind me. I'm in a way of you'll see there's another laptop, and I have the Arturia stuff. I got their little keyboard and their Spark controller for rhythm buttons. So that's what that is, and that's kind of it. The rest is software synths. I can't say that I'm that picky that I gotta have all the stuff. Although wish I still had it set up, but it's just managing all that stuff and being in production is a lot. So the software synths, having a 32 voice stereo Prophet 5 in software is pretty darn handy.
Yeah,
it is definitely handy. And that's always one of the constant battles, the hardware versus software battle. But the brutal reality is, it's like when when you're working on music and films and you're under a deadline, you don't have time to figure out why one of your voice chips isn't triggering. And that's just a brutal reality of it. If you have the luxury of sitting around and messing with stuff for days and you don't have a deadline, then sure, it's cool. And it looks great for a studio vibe. And we've got quite a bit of gear laying around here.
I absolutely, no, I love gear. And, I lament every piece I sold. I wish I had it all. But it's just over time, here we are 30 plus years later, various people beg me for stuff. Other times it was, wasn't really using it, was sitting in the corner getting dust. But yeah, there was the main fleet that I had in the day, sort of
back in the day. So give us a time frame and spell out the rig back then.
All right. So just a quick timeline for me. So originally, grew up in New Jersey, but moved to Cleveland, Ohio for high school. So that's really where I started to become me. I finally figured that out. I was an art student with music as a secondary thing. So I played saxophone, alto sax in the band. Prior to that, in New Jersey, I had accordion lessons, so I had a little keyboard stuff. But that kind of all parked there, and it was a hobby. The idea was I was going to be a sculptor or a painter or some character like that. And then one of the girls in the art class her boyfriend had a band, and he knew I played saxophone, so they invited me to sit in for a night on a sock hop and literally read charts of big band music. Well, I did it. It was fun. At the end of the night, he handed me $80. I went, whoa, there's money here, and it was fun. So he went on and started a rock band. I begged my mom to buy me a bass guitar and a Silvertone amp from the Sears catalog, and I had my little Kingston bass, and I learned bass real fast. Joined his rock band, and so I was a rock band guy for high school. And this is now 64. I graduated in 66 at high school. Went to college, the late 60s, and my band got fairly popular in the area. We were a cover band because being an original didn't make any sense. We had a great singer named Woody Leffel who this guy's as good as Robert Plant or Jim Morrison, just never broke out of the region. And so we had some really, really nice stuff. We got known as a Doors band because of what he did. And then one of the earlier bands was called the Tree Stumps, and that was where I met Woody originally. That band went on to become a band called Raw Silk, or an album Raw Silk, called band was called Silk, and the bass player of that band was a fellow named Michael Stanley, who's regionally very famous in Northeast Ohio now. He's still a bit of a TV star, and the producer of that was Bill Simzik, who went on to do at the same time the James Gang and Joe Walsh, and then also our band. And then eventually Simzik went on to produce the Eagles. So he was the thread that got Joe Walsh over to the Eagles eventually. So anyway, he was a rock and roll guy. Then because the band didn't, and two key points. I thought I was a rock star because we opened for the Who on the Tommy tour for about 4 shows, and that was mind blowing. And as a bass player, I got my first set of roto sounds directly from John Entwistle. He gave them to me, and I went, and this was long before they were available in the U.S. So I got to be instead of a thump bigger, I got a clang, and it was like the giant guitar instead of the bass guitar. That was fun. And then we also opened for the Cream, so I actually got to open for the Cream for Wheels of Fire tour. So. Touch that stuff. My hair was down to here. I was, the typical guy with the van and all the gear and all the other stuff that, at the time it was really fun. I got to tell you, it was really a blast. And then it went into more of trying to do original music instead of going out and playing, cover music. So started writing music, et cetera, et cetera. Went into a studio period. This would be 71 to 74, where I worked in a music store in Cleveland called DeFiore's Music, and I was the guitar repair guy down in the basement. That was my day gig. And then we had this rented place in a sort of a funky neighborhood in Cleveland, over top of a pawn shop. We'd go there and jam all night. I bought tape recorders, and that's when I bought my first synth. My first synth was an EML 101. I had a little funky organ that I ran through it, so that was my polyphonic instrument. And then for my guitar rig, I had 2 Echoplexes, a pair of Fender amps, a Leslie. And so I got a lot out of guitar in the world of sound modifications and pedals and stuff like that. And that original band was called Braino, which never seen the light of day, but I have all the tapes and at some point need to transfer them and exhibit the Braino material. The next band after that modulated to the funky rehearsal space, went into actually a music shop that was specialized in what we now call pro audio. So rather than a music store with drums and fiddles, we just specialized in keyboards and tape recorders. I had a partner, David Yost, who was an expert at all the stuff, and he had a big wall of modular Moog and stuff like that. So we had a lot of fun. And that we called that place the Pi Corporation, Pi like pi r squared, which has another thread we'll touch on at some point. So anyhow, that was Pi Corp. There is a Pi Corp CD available at my website if anybody's interested to hear what that is. And that was really my experimental electronic period where, I really started fooling with textures and ambience, and in a lot of the ways, Pink Floyd was my band. I mean, I could have been in Pink Floyd very easily. What they were doing is what I was doing, and that was all the way back into the Braino band. And so another thread starts with the Braino band. We're the house band in a funky bar in Cleveland called the Smiling Dog Saloon. And the owner of Smiling Dog Saloon has this thing where he's booking these national jazz acts on sort of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, traveling from New York through Cleveland onto Chicago. And that's sort of their road show. So we were the house band, so they used our gear. I mean, it was Return to Forever. It was Miles Davis. It was every major Cannonball Adderley, every major jazz act. And one night, this band Weather Report comes into play. Well, I've got my whole quadraphonic thing set up. We got echoes. The sound guy is a fellow named my sound guy is a fellow named Brian Risner. At the end of that gig, they invited us to go on the road because they had no roadies. So when I was setting up his own keyboard, et cetera. And the club owner said, you really need one of these guys. So because I had a job at the music store, Brian went off with Weather Report. So this would be 1972, being their first road guy, house mixer, et cetera, et cetera. And he was with them through the bulk of their career. Going through my original period with Pi Corp, then we get to about 76, and Brian says, hey, how'd you like to come out on the road with Weather Report? Joe's rig has gotten so big now that we really need a full-time guy to manage the 2 ARP 2600s, the Oberheim, the piano pickup, and it keeps growing. So I went out with Weather Report 76 to 1980 as Joe Zonal's keyboard roadie, the keyboard tech. And so my job was to keep those things alive out on the road. Of course, they were studio gear, so I have all kinds of stories of, what happened on the road with this stuff. And right around that same time, I'm going to say 76, 77, Dave Smith invents the Prophet 5. And I come back from the roadshow, and they say there was this thing at NAMM that was amazing. You got to go see it. So I literally got on a plane, went to Dave Smith in San Jose, and there was parked, Prophet 5, number 5 or whatever, just the bench test. I said, I got to have one of these. I got him to give me one, flew back to Los Angeles with it, arrived with the Prophet 5 in my dining room table with no programming on it, and I had to take it to Joe Zawinul the next morning. So I sat there programming all this stuff, my version of brass and strings and claves and whatever. Put it in front of Joe Zawinul. He listened to it, had me tweak some stuff. We saved all that stuff, but it had a service issue because it was so new. So I had to send that back to Joe Zawinul, or I'm sent back to Dave Smith to get fixed. And Dave goes, Alan, there's some pretty cool programs on this one. Could we use them for our presets? And I kind of said, well, I was flattered. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So a lot of those original Prophet 5 presets were from that session. I had done programming it up and put it in front of Joe and getting it blessed and setting it up there. So that was an interesting little Prophet 5. So I became a Prophet 5 guy. I really understood the machine. And so fast forward now to 1979, and the most unlikely person to ever get you a career move, another friend from Cleveland, a fellow named Pax Lemon, who's this big burly biker character, but he was interested in synths, and he was an artist in his own right. He's now working at Paramount Films in a transfer bay, making copies of quarter-inch tapes. Being copies, and two guys have a conversation behind him. Are having conversation behind them, and he kind of overhears it, and they're looking for somebody who knows about synthesizers. So he turns around and goes, oh man, you got to talk to my buddy Alan, man. Yeah, he knows all about synthesizers. He works for Weather Report. And they look at him and they go, Weather Report, is that the one at 11 o'clock? Thinking that he's talking about the meteorology report. Well, nonetheless, they were open-minded enough. He gave him my number. They called me up and they said, Alan, we're working on this movie. I understand your friend Pax says you know about synthesizers. Would you come down and meet us and do some sort of an audition tape? Of course, I go down. The two guys are Richard Anderson and Stephen Flick, who are both Academy Award-winning sound supervisors later on, but we're all pups in the day. This is 1979. Turns out they're doing Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So my audition for Star Trek was to make the sound of the Starship Enterprise going from warp 1 to warp 7. So I went back in my little dining room studio, had the Prophet 5 there and a little TIAC 4-track tape recorder, and I dial up this effect using the Polymod, which was a nice mod thing. And the idea was you shouldn't even go because that was too short. It had to go modulate. So the idea was to make this sort of this rising tone that once it got near the top, there was another one coming up underneath it, and it just kept modulating up and up. And it was like artistically. I think of these things visually first because I'm the painter guy. So I had this idea, turn it in. Well, anyhow, that audition tape becomes the sound of the Enterprise, and I get the gig. So now I go from jazz to movies, and that was my first movie gig was on Star Trek. So you can't hit a home run any farther than that. That was just completely out of the park. I went on to do 6 more Star Treks after that in this case, it was before the word sound design was permitted. So I was a special sound effects specialist, much like you would hire a visual effects specialist, a person for you've got this one shot and you need something special, so I want to go out and do it. So that was my job, was to make sound effects or create library for the editors to then cut in.